at giving a constitution to ourselves, and we think we've given a good constitution to ourselves. But a lot depends upon the people who are managing the constitution or who are running the administration. If we have people of character and integrity, then even a bad constitution can work well. But if we don't have people of character and integrity, however good a constitution may be, it can't work. So really it depends upon us to elect the right people, and for the right people then to work the constitution as it should be.
I'm really, really privileged to have Justice Lokur here as our guest, because we're ending this year on a note of electoral victories for many parties. There are two limbs of every democracy. There's the electoral democracy and there's constitutional democracy. And the electoral democracy is always flowering in our country. We've just been through a wonderful spate of elections. We are heading for the big finals in 2024. But Justice Madan Lokur has just published something called the Citizens Report, which is holding a mirror to us as a society, to our governments and to the media, and showing us our health as a constitutional democracy. It is the fundamental fabric on which we all live. And so to analyze that and diagnose the health of all of us as a society, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Justice Madan Lokur. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Where do I sit? Here? Come. Thank you. So thank you very much for being here and being this patient with us. You know, as I said, that there is this two limbs of every society, every democracy. There's the electoral democracy and the constitutional one. You know, you've just put out the Citizens Report, which does have a lot of alarm signals, and we'll look at those. But I wanted to first ask you, how does one solve this dilemma? You know, as a jurist, you've been Chief Justice, you've been in the Supreme Court, that, you know, and it's not just the government of the present day, but governments in the past, where very often if they're not doing things which serve the Constitution, but they're still very, very popular with the people. So who then is supposed to be the keeper of the Constitution? How would you solve that?
Yeah, well, you know, if you look at it from the legal point of view.
Sir, just speak into the mic,
yeah,
please.
Sorry. If you're looking at it from the legal point of view, then the keeper of the Constitution really is the judiciary. But if you're looking at it from a realistic point of view, then the keeper of the Constitution are the people. You know, we have given ourselves the Constitution. That's why the Constitution begins with the words, we the people. So really, it's entirely up to us as the people to see how the Constitution works. We elect the right kind of people, and we expect them to work the Constitution as was intended by the framers of the Constitution. You know, I'd just like to mention the speech given by Dr. Ambedkar one day before the Constitution was adopted on the 25th of November 1949, and the speech given by Dr. Rajendra Prasad on the 26th of November 1949. Both of them said, you know, more or less the same thing. They said that we have given to all of us.
So will you just speak? Yeah. I'm sorry, can everyone hear at the back? Okay, sorry.
Okay, we have given to ourselves a very good constitution. I mean, we've worked hard at giving a constitution to ourselves, and we think we've given a good constitution to ourselves. But a lot depends upon the people who are managing the constitution or who are running the administration. If we have people of character and integrity, then even a bad constitution can work well. But if we don't have people of character and integrity, however good a constitution may be, it can't work. So really it depends upon us to elect the right people and for the right people then to work the constitution as it should be.
Right, so I want to go into, the sort of different parameters on which you did this citizens report. And, like we said, it's finally the voice of the citizen that has to be heard. There's one phrase in particular that you used, which you said that bulldozer justice has come to replace natural justice. Could you tell us a little about that and, in what ways is that manifesting?
Yeah, in the recent past, we've had demolitions, okay, left, right, and center. I mean, something happens and you say, all right, I'm going to demolish the place. Even if a person is not directly involved in whatever transpired, but you send a bulldozer and you demolish everything. Now, that's one aspect of bulldozer justice. The other aspect of bulldozer justice is where, you just say that, well, I want to do this, as the government, I want to do this, and I'm going to do it regardless of what you may think, okay? So, you've had recently, if I may say so, the case of Mahua Moitra. I think it was a foregone conclusion what is going to happen, okay? Regardless of whether you follow the principles of natural justice or you don't follow the principles of natural justice, we want to make sure that she's thrown out of parliament. So, this is another aspect of bulldozer justice.
So, sir, I'm just going to ask you a question there because, despite my own sort of obvious sort of value system by which I live, I've become very careful that we should kind of articulate the exact evidence upon which we are saying things rather than assume that everybody is with you on that, So when you say that there's been a slip in natural justice where Mahua is concerned, could you encapsulate for the audience just ABC, what was not done right?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the report. It's not yet in the public domain, even though it's been tabled in Parliament. But from whatever I've read in the newspapers and in magazines, and from what she has said, the kind of questions that she was asked, you don't ask these kind of questions, I mean, when you're conducting an inquiry, you don't ask what do you do at night, whom do you speak to at night, So, I mean, this is... This is not on. I mean, that's all that I can say about this.
Right.
Yeah.
No, what caught my eye in that also was that she was not allowed to actually cross-question those who had accused her.
Yes.
And that, in fact, brings me to the next question. And also the wording of the report. Again, we'll leave it for the Parliament and the judiciary to decide whether indeed there's been everything that she's been accused of. But to call it a heinous crime, the word heinous should be with heinous crime, not with the sharing of a portal. So those things I think would be evidence of there being a disproportion to it.
Yeah.
But sir, this thing about demolitions, it came as a shock for me, and I don't know how many of you know that in the run-up to the G20, there have been 260,000 people who have been displaced and their houses demolished. This has not really made the kind of news that it should. So, sir, again, there is a judiciary, in different governments, in Uttar Pradesh, in Madhya Pradesh, elsewhere as well. It's begun this collective punishment, that you just demolish an entire neighborhood. I must say that Aditya Nath and others, the chief ministers have said there's no communal angle to this. They've given evidence that they do it as much to Hindus or to Muslims. But isn't there a judiciary that should stop this? Because it's just, before there's evidence, before there's examination, you've already provided the punishment, So why has there not been a stop on this?
In my view, there's been a change in the way the judiciary functions. Okay. When we started with this public interest litigation in the 1980s, things that were there in the newspapers, were being picked up by the Supreme Court or were being brought to the notice of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would act upon it. One very famous case was about the blinding of so-called criminals in Bhagalpur. All right, it arose out of a newspaper report. And a lawyer brought it to the notice of the Supreme Court and said, well, this is what I've read in the newspapers, and can you do something about it? And the Supreme Court took it up as a public interest litigation. The Supreme Court also went far enough to say that you send me a postcard, okay, and I will take your letter, which is a postcard, as a public interest petition, and I will act upon it. So the judiciary at that time was far more active, okay. Whereas today, even if something happens in the newspapers, you read about it, you read about demolitions, okay, you read about people getting arbitrarily arrested. The court says, well, we're not going to act upon it unless somebody brings it to our notice. That is the difference, okay, and I think if some of the demolitions that are happening now had happened in the 1980s, for example, I have no doubt that the Supreme Court would have taken it up on its own and said that, what's going on? Right?
I mean, again, I'm sure everyone in the audience has their own perspective on it, but it is disconcerting how many people say that, oh, it's good, we need a kind of strong government that will take control. But if you really look at collective punishment, then the natural corollary to that is what, say, Israel is doing to Palestine now. For one heinous act on October 13th, there's collective punishment being meted out to an entire society, So I guess the cliff just keeps getting more and more slippery, when you accept these things. But so, again, in your report, you've brought up the fact that the fundamental, value by which a democracy lives, and certainly India's democracy has lived, is that there's a presumed innocence till you're proved guilty. Now, there's been an overhaul of the Indian Penal Code, the Criminal Justice, the CRPC, and the Evidence Act. And while a lot of it needed overhauling, and this government has had the initiative to do it, there are also many areas of concern. So could you share with the audience, because very often all of this happens outside of citizens' attention?
Yeah. Well, there are two areas of concern. One is, keeping a person in detention longer than is necessary. Under the old, or it's still there actually, under the CRPC, you can keep a person in detention for a period of 60 days without filing a charge sheet. Okay. Now, one of the things that the police has been doing, and which I don't approve, is that you file a sort of a half-baked charge sheet within that 60-day period so that you justify the person's detention. And then after that you say, well, I'm going to file a supplementary charge sheet. So that 60-day period becomes 90 days, it can become anything, because you filed a supplementary charge sheet. That has now been legalized in the new Criminal Procedure Code, whatever it is called. So the time for keeping a person in detention has increased, which means a curtailment of a person's liberty. Okay, that I think is absolutely wrong. I think that's a very serious area of concern. The second area of concern is, grant of bail, which is again a curtailment of a person's liberty. The law regarding bail is very well settled. I mean, it's been settled hundreds of years ago. And the Supreme Court has reiterated the principles on which you can refuse bail or in which you can grant bail. But again, the new CRPC brings in, all kinds of other things. There was no need to, bring in anything, considering that the law is well settled. These are some areas, where the curtailment of personal liberty is something that I'm, a little unhappy about.
Yeah. Again, just so that the audience understands the significance of what you're saying, I'd just like to share two statistics with you. I don't know how many of us are familiar with the UAPA, which is the Anti-Terror Act. And there's been a lot of people are now getting arrested under the UAPA, journalists, sort of activists, which is like a war against this nation, and you're labeled a terrorist, and you can be in jail without bail. The courts, in fact, can't give you bail. And the conviction percentage on cases against UAPA, correct me, sir, if I'm wrong, is just 2.2%. And on the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, where the ED or the police can put you in jail without even telling you why you are under arrest or what is the accusation against you. There are 2,500 arrests that have happened under the PMLA, and the conviction rate over there, I think in the last year or two, is down to 0.5%, you know, and yet you're in jail because the courts can't even give you bail under these acts. So, but again, sir, you know, these can't be passed by the government without some amount of sort of sanction from the courts. You know, so what has changed about India's judiciary?
Yeah, you know, this is what I feel. I mean, the courts are not being proactive as they should be, you know, particularly when it comes to matters of personal liberty. Now, recently, just a couple of days ago, the prison statistics of 2022 have come out. Also, the report given by, the annual report given by the National Crime Records Bureau, NCRB. The number of people in Tihar jail in Delhi who are under trial is something like 80%. You know, so I mean, guys who have not been found guilty of a crime, investigation is going on, they're just hanging around in jail, you know. And I've been to jail, not as a prisoner, but I mean, just as a visitor.
So clearly you haven't been living an upright citizen's life. You know? You're not in jail. Too mild a life.
Yeah, but I mean, the conditions are not good at all. Okay, when you're talking about Tihar jail, you're talking, I've been to other jails as well. The conditions are not good at all. And people are writing about it. You know, some of the people who've been in jail have now written about it. I've been to observation homes for children. It's pathetic, you know. So why do you want to keep people in custody? That's the question I keep asking myself. And I think that's the question that the courts must ask. That is it absolutely necessary to keep a person in custody? Just because the police says that, oh, you know, this guy is going to tamper with the evidence? What is the material on the basis of which the police is saying he's going to tamper with the evidence? What is the material on the basis of which the police is saying that he's going to influence witnesses? Just because the police say so, you say, okay, you know, I believe it. That's wrong, you know. That's where the courts have to be more proactive and say that, listen, show me on what basis are you saying that this person is tampering with the evidence. Show me the basis on which you're saying that he's going to run away or that he's going to influence witnesses. If you can't show that to me, sorry, I'm not going to keep him in jail.
But sir, you know, again, to share the sheer enormity, and like I said, you know, we're all, there's so much about Indian democracy to celebrate, you know. First of all, Indian elections, the way it goes smoothly, governments hand over to each other, you know, at a time when America can't get an election right. That's a big point of pride. But at the same time, you know, like you just said, there's under trials. 80% of people in jail are just under trial. But so I'll throw the figure back at you, that there are 50 million cases that are waiting to be heard in the Indian judiciary. 50 million. And there are 420 judges who are missing from the system. We need 420 more judges. They haven't been appointed yet. You know, so how can a situation of this enormity exist and it not be making headlines, be dealt with on a hot footing? And of course, there's been huge face-offs between the government and the judiciary about judicial appointments. But the judges are not doing a great job on it either, sir. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, well, you know, the 50 million is going to become 51 million very soon, okay? Now, the problem is that, you know, we don't have anything called court management, all right? The Supreme Court has said that there should be court management, case management. We don't have that. We haven't institutionalized that at all. That's one. The second thing is that...
so if in a short way, could you explain what is court management?
Yeah, you know, a case has to take a particular course, right, within a particular timeline. It can't be that, you know, if you don't do this today, it doesn't matter, do it next week, right? So if the government, for example, doesn't file a reply in time, and they haven't filed replies in time in any number of cases, tell the government that, listen, I'm going to impose costs. And it's not going to be, 100 rupees, 200 rupees, it's going to be a couple of thousand rupees. So that the government knows and is accountable to the people in doing their job in time. Now, 50 million, of course, is a huge number. I don't know how they're going to tackle it, but there are ways and means of doing it, because many of those cases, many of those cases, let me tell you, are perhaps infructuous. The people have either died or they're not interested, okay? There are cases pending where the person has probably served his sentence. There are cases where the case can be compounded, the offense can be compounded. Unless you look at it, unless you look at all these cases, just pick up these 50,000 cases, 50 million cases, and start looking at each one of them. You're not going to make, any headway.
No, but so why are there not enough judges in the system?
Well, appointment of judges is a bit of a problem, because, I think the government is acting a little tough. It was not like that earlier, right? Earlier, if the court said that we would like to have some person appointed as a judge, we are recommending that person's name, then the government would accept it. But now, in the recent past, the government is, raising all kinds of objections. And again, it used to be that if the government raises an objection, fine. I mean, they're entitled to raise an objection. But when it comes back to the Supreme Court for reconsideration, and the Supreme Court looks at the objections, looks at, the credentials of the person who has been recommended, the Supreme Court may accept the objections of the government. But if the Supreme Court says, sorry, we are not accepting your objections, then the government is bound to accept that recommendation. That was the practice all along. There were very few cases in which the government had objections, but if they did, the Supreme Court would look into it. But now, you have a situation where the Supreme Court collegium reiterates the recommendation, and the government says, fine, you might reiterate it, but we are not going to move the file. And there are plenty of such cases, where the Supreme Court has reiterated the recommendation once, twice, but the government has not moved.
So here again, I'd just like to push you a little bit on that, which is that it's true that, and it's been making national headlines that there's a huge face-off between the government and the judiciary on the appointments. But it's also true that there was a lot of discomfort with the, with the collegium system, because even the judges have not been transparent, have not acted quickly, have not explained their decisions. And, this literally sits at the heart of Indian, any democracy, but certainly in India, a complex country like ours, that the judiciary has to stay independent, Now, between this tussle between whether the government should have a say in appointing or whether the judges should do it themselves, neither system has been perfect. We who have created such a complex constitution that has stood the test of time, we are still a sort of semi-healthy functioning democracy with a lot of illnesses on the side, but the structures have held good. Why have you all not been able to think through a structure which is apparently transparent, vividly fair, and will be fast enough that we can fill all these places in the judiciary?
Yeah, you see, as far as the appointment system is concerned, no system can be perfect, right? People say that you should follow the system that you have in the United States, for example, where you have the person being recommended. But that's at the Supreme Court level, that's not at the federal level. So no system can be perfect. In some countries you have elections. Now, as things stand, and until, the recent past, when the controversy about appointments surfaced, the system was functioning well. What is the system actually? The system is, I think that this is a little important. For the appointment of a judge to the High Court, the Chief Justice of the High Court and the two senior-most judges of the High Court, they recommend the name, all right? So they do the homework, They know who are the lawyers who are good. They know who are the others from the district judiciary who are good. They make the recommendations, so the initial homework is done. The initial screening is done. All right? Then it goes to the government. And the government is supposed to, find out if there's something wrong about this person, which the courts, which the Chief Justice and the other judges don't know. Now, normally, there is nothing that is found by the government through the Intelligence Bureau. Then it goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court again scrutinizes, has the High Court made a right recommendation? Have they considered all the factors? What does the government have to say? And if the government doesn't have anything to say, fine, we accept the name. But, and also, the Supreme Court judges, the collegium, will talk to the judges who have been associated with that High Court in some capacity, right, either as judges of that High Court or as Chief Justices of that High Court. So there is enough scrutiny, okay? There may be a reason why, in spite of all this scrutiny that takes place, the Supreme Court judges feel that, well, we don't think this person is fit, all right, whatever the reason is. But that's between the Supreme Court and that person. There's no point in telling the whole world that, I think this person is unfit because of A, B, C, D reason. It damages the reputation of that person. Now, with this kind of scrutiny, normally the Supreme Court recommendation and the High Court recommendation should be good. There might be errors. I'm not saying that it's foolproof, but by and large, it would be good. Now, from that recommendation given by the Supreme Court, which accepts the High Court recommendation, it goes to the government. It has already gone to the government once. It goes to the government formally for being sent to the President for the warrant. Then the government says, listen, now we have another objection. Now, why wasn't that objection taken earlier? Right? Why was it kept from the Supreme Court? So the government says, now we have another objection and we are sending it back to you. So the Supreme Court says, well, we've considered your second objection and we find no substance in it and we, reiterate it. So
in this impasse, like I said, even in the Supreme Court, there are judges missing. There are 420 judges missing in the country. Yeah. There are 50 million cases pending. When there's an impasse between a government and the judiciary, there's no further mechanism on who should prevail. No, it's just an impasse.
No, the practice has been that what the Supreme Court says prevails, right?
But it is not prevailing right now.
But right now it's not prevailing.
Right. So, sir, I just want to draw the audience's attention to another, which has been the sedition law. So when we look at democracy, as you said, liberty is really at the heart of it. The freedom to dissent, to criticize, all of that is literally the character of our democracy. The government has done away with the sedition law, which was being misused, but you're still very worried about the substitutions that has taken place. So would you encapsulate that for the audience? Yeah,
you see, the sedition law as it stood under the Indian Penal Code, it's something more than just disaffection towards the government. Gandhiji said, I don't have any affection towards the government, So you want to put me in jail, put me in jail. And he was put in jail. So, but that
was a colonial government, yeah.
That was the colonial government. But sedition is really something which is not just plain and simple disaffection, that I don't like the government. But it is something more than that, which is in the nature of inciting violence. So somebody gives a speech which incites violence or has the tendency to incite violence, then you can say that, well, yeah, this is seditious. And then arrest him. And many of our freedom fighters have gone to jail for that. But now it was being used, and it is being used extensively on tweets. Okay, so somebody gives a tweet and you say, oh, this is seditious because I think, it's going to incite violence against the government, so I arrest you. So you had that case of, a school in Bangalore. There was some kids were enacting a play, and the police said, these kids are being taught something seditious, so the play will not go on, and they, interrogated the teachers and all that. That's going too far. So a journalist writes something, you say, oh, it's going to incite violence. There's no end to it,
But as I was saying, the sedition law now has been done away with. But I was asking you, what is your area of concern still?
Yeah, well, the area of concern still is that it is still very amorphous. I mean, the Supreme Court has way back, and again recently, it has explained what is the sedition law. All right? So the problem is that the police is not interpreting the sedition law as interpreted by the Supreme Court. So you just get up one day and say that, well, this thing is, this tweet is seditious.
Yeah.
Right? Now in the new law, it's the same thing. The words are slightly different. The word sedition is not used.
Yeah. No, in fact, I wanted to, what I was probably asking you to define was that, I don't know how many of us are aware or cognizant of the fact that the Indian Penal Code and criminal procedure is being rewritten. The Evidence Act is being redone. And now, while the sedition law has been set aside, but if you say anything that might affect the sovereignty, integrity, and unity of the country, then you can be jailed without, again, being told what you're accused of and without bail, so that,
Yeah, you're right.
The definition of what is unity and integrity and sovereignty of the nation is amorphous, like you said, it's literally like taking the sedition law and planting it right in the heart of the CRPC.
Yeah, you see, actually, if you look at it, the expression unity and integrity of India, the sovereignty of integrity of India is a part of the Constitution of India, right? So, in that sense, it is not amorphous. I mean, one has to be reasonable, like Dr. Ambedkar said, like Dr. Rajendra Prasad said. Look at the spirit of the Constitution. But if somebody says something and you say, oh, it's going to, damage the integrity of India, anything can damage the integrity of India. I mean, you can misinterpret anything and say that, well, it's going to damage the integrity of India.
I was just going to bring up that nowadays quite often there's a discussion about how the southern states are very worried about the delimitation exercise that will happen because, the southern states, say take Tamil Nadu, is very good on the human index, that the women have education, there's health, etc. Their population control is very strong. But when the delimitation exercise happens, then Bihar and UP, which has excessive population, will actually get more electoral strength. So there's a lot of discussion about this. But I very often worry because I see in the media that different organs of government are saying that, oh, people who are criticizing this are now creating a north-south enmity and are affecting the unity of the country, So the word unity is like, as I said, it can be interpreted that you're just analyzing a problematic situation and that can be that you're creating enmity.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then put that person in jail, you know. So there's no end to it. Yeah.
Right. So, sir, what are the other areas? Your citizens report also looked at the underprivileged, at gender justice, at economic justice. So could you share some of the really stark statistics that your report found?
Yeah, well, I can't remember the statistics offhand, but, my feeling is, and I had that feeling when I was in the Supreme Court as well, that the underprivileged do not get a voice in the courts, right? And they are the ones, I mean, when you talk about under trial prisoners, many of them, most of them, are persons who come from marginalized sections of society. Now, when are they going to get justice? So you can talk about tribals, you can talk about the poor, you can talk about marginalized sections, you can talk about migrants. Right? We have an act called the Building and Other Construction Workers Act. So if you're constructing a building like this hotel, for example, there is a cess which has to go and to be used for the benefit of the workers. 1996 Act, there's something like 30,000 crores, which has not been utilized, right? And when we asked these questions, what's happened to this money? One of the states gave an answer that we bought washing machines. Another one said we bought laptops. Now, construction workers, what are they going to do with washing machines? What are they going to do with laptops?
Laptops, I don't know, sir, because in fact, the digital divide is so huge that now it's such a, tool of access that I know, and I often say that I wish governments would, even on EMI, enable everybody to own a laptop, because I know that all the workers that work with us, the one thing everyone is thirsting for, all their children, everybody is thirsting for is a laptop,
Yeah, but the kind of worker that you're talking about is different from the construction worker.
Construction worker, of course. Yeah.
And they're basically migrants. Okay, they go from one state to another, from one district to another. They don't even have electricity. They don't have a place to stay. But you've got 30,000 crores lying in the kitty somewhere, which is not being utilized. So, these are problems. We keep reading in the newspapers about these scavengers, manual scavenging. What has been done about that?
Yeah. So, sir, I'm going to come back to two other indices before we stop. But I wanted to ask your, perspective on the Sahara case. Because when you're talking about, prevention of money laundering, financial crimes, this is a very strange situation where Subrata Roy has now died. There are no claimants to his money. There's 23,000 crore that nobody is claiming, but it was taken over. And possibly now the government will or will not use it for its own purposes. But what is your perspective on that particular case?
Yeah, well, I have not given it much thought, but what happens in cases of economic crimes, to trace the money, the origin is very, very difficult. If you remember in the 1990s, mid-1990s, we had this Jain Hawala case, right, where money was apparently going outside the country through Hawala transactions. To whom did the money belong? Nobody knows till today. And nobody will ever know, So that money trail is something which is very, very difficult to catch. And sometimes, I'm not saying it happens always, but sometimes, it could be that black money. So the person who is invested may not want to come out.
So, sir, speaking from a kind of perspective that I hear from others, we are talking about liberty, justice, constitutional values. Very often there's an impatience with that whole process, and a lot of people will say, let's rule with fear, because there's so much of chaos in the Indian system that a lot of people will say, we want a strong government, we want a government that instills fear. These ED cases are great, the income tax cases are great, people will be afraid and will be more careful. What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, this is not what was intended by the Constitution, That's why I mentioned about what Dr. Ambedkar said and what Dr. Rajendra Prasad said. This is not what was intended. Now you have, constitutional values. Fraternity is one of the constitutional values. It's there in the preamble. Liberty, justice, equality, and fraternity. Now can we say that, listen, forget about fraternity, let's take one section of society based on their religion or based on their caste and get after them? What happens to the constitutional values? What happens to constitutional morality? Where the state legislature passes a law and the governor of the state says, to hell with you, I'm going to sit on that law. So these are things that, we need to think about. Our constitutional values, which we've been nurturing for the last 75 years. Constitutional morality. We've had those ups and downs. Article 356 has been used very often in the past, where state governments have just been chucked out. So these are things that we need to look at. And these are things that we need to think about, right? Now, once we implement the Constitution and we implement the laws, in the spirit in which they were enacted, keeping the vision of our founding fathers and founding mothers in mind, you don't need fear, right? Then everybody will do the right thing. You take an example of the use of safety belts in Delhi, right? Maybe in the first couple of days when safety belts, in cars became necessary, mandatory, maybe there were a few challans. But now everybody just puts it on without even thinking about it. There's no fear involved in that.
Fear of death, maybe.
Fear of death, yeah.
No, but I'm just... Yeah.
Crash helmets. People wear crash helmets, right? So fear is not necessary for the implementation of the law.
But I'll come to one more thorny question, and then, I'll just share a couple more things with the audience, take your perspective, and we're running out of time. But, when there was this whole face-off between the Minister of Law and the judiciary on certain enactments of Parliament, acts of Parliament, the law minister said this is the will of the people, that the government represents the will of the people because they are the ones who are elected and the judiciary is not elected. So in that case, so if the will of the people has put a certain character of government in Parliament and they're enacting laws which go against the spirit of the Constitution, where would you stand on that debate?
Yeah, you see, you have to accept the fact that the Constitution of India is supreme, right? You cannot violate the Constitution of India. Now, once you accept that as axiomatic, any law that violates the Constitution of India is unconstitutional. That's it. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's been passed unanimously or it's been passed by a majority, it doesn't matter. If it's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. That is the touchstone for challenging a law. And our courts went a step further and evolved something called the basic structure doctrine. Now, our constitution is a democratic, republican constitution. Supposing tomorrow Parliament says unanimously that freedom of speech is abolished, all right, or democracy is abolished. On the face of it, it is unconstitutional, right? So the Supreme Court said, in a majority of 7-6, that you cannot change the basic structure of the Constitution. It has to remain a democracy. It has to remain a republic, all right? So you can't say that from tomorrow there'll be no, you can't dissent. There can't be freedom of speech. You can't assemble anywhere, right? You can't do trade and commerce, okay? Then you're violating the basic structure. Or if Parliament says from tomorrow there's not going to be free and fair elections, all elections are going to be rigged. We are not going to have free and fair elections. You're violating the basic structure, right? Or tomorrow you say, majority in Parliament, the judiciary is not going to be independent. Every case that the government files, the judiciary will decide in favor of the government. That's the end of the independence of the judiciary. That's also violative of the basic structure. Or if you say that India ceases to be a federal nation, you can't do that.
So, sir, I'd just like to share two more points with that the Citizens Report brought out that on economic gender justice, that India has actually dropped 35 positions down to one of the lowest on economic gender justice index. Though there's a report which says that poverty index has fallen by almost 10%, at the same time that there are almost 400 million people without access to water, and to get 2,500 calories of food a day, there's a gigantic number. If I'm correct, then almost 80% people are not able to access that. So while we celebrate different facets of democracy, these are conversations which need to be really bubbling up in national headlines in the media as well. And when we discuss this, it should not be looked at as seditious or that you're creating discontent against the government. There should be freedom to discuss this. Yeah. So these are the things that you've brought out in the report.
Yeah.
I'd just like to ask one last question, sir, that if you were today to analyze the health of our democracy, as I said, we've just been through a spate of interesting election results. We're heading for a mega election in 2024. But if you were to kind of, you've just done a report, if you were to rate the health of Indian democracy, where would you put that mark?
Yeah, it's like this. We've done extremely well in some areas. There's no doubt about it. Whether the government takes credit for it or not is besides the point. We've done extremely well in certain areas. But there are, for example, in technology, right? I mean, almost everybody has a smartphone, and you can do a lot of, your banking and all kinds of other things on your mobile phone, right? That's one aspect. Okay. There are several things on which we need to concentrate. Okay, it's not that everything that we've done is good, and there are certain areas about which we don't even need to bother. Okay, so I would say that, criticism of the government is one aspect. Personal liberty is one aspect. You can't say that, well, the government has not done well in a particular area, so therefore I'm going to put you in jail. But if I say that the government has done something very good in a particular area, are you going to give me a Padma Shri for it? You're not. Right?
No, you do get Padma Shris.
Yeah, people do get Padma Shris, but not for saying that the government is doing a damn good job. But, so that balance has to be maintained. And I think with this, the crackdown on personal liberties, the crackdown on some of the fundamental rights that we have, the crackdown on general rights that we have under the law, I think there, it's a bit of a problem. It's not a bit of a problem, it's quite a problem. So one has to balance the good with the not so good.
Right, sir.
Yeah.
And in that role is the last, which is the role of the media, because in this tussle between the government and judiciary, we are seeing that tension played out.
Yeah.
Where would you rate the health of Indian media at this point?
Yeah, the Indian media, this is the problem, what you were talking about, fear, right? Now, if the Indian media says that, well, this is not good, okay, the guy is going to get arrested, or the guy is going to be, his employer is going to be told that, listen.
Raided.
Yeah, raided or, sack this person. There are a couple of editors of newspapers or magazines, who've been asked to quit. Why? Because they've said that, well, look at the not so good as well. We can't have this, ostrich-like situation. Everything is good. There are many things which are good, no doubt, but there are some things which are not so good. And you can't be ostrich-like about that.
Right. Oh, we'll end on that note, sir. As I said, this was a moment of just looking back at 2023 before we move into 24. That, like we said, India's been making waves on many counts, from the Mars mission to sending, exploration into the sun. But there's also things closer home which need attention. And we, the people, need to keep our democracy safe, even as we vote to, both reward and punish governments. But I think the spotlight is really important, and to remind ourselves that liberty is the most precious commodity that we can possibly have, and that we should be able to both celebrate and criticize with equal freedom. And thank you for reminding us about that, sir.